Hey, everybody, and welcome to this underscore where we're going to be talking about how Accenture is implementing AI in education. So I'm going to introduce you to our special guest in a moment, but just a little housekeeping stage setting here. So this is the third webinar in a series of 4 webinars today on practical use cases of AI, right? So our Forrester research, we commissioned some research from Forrester, and that data said that over 50% of companies and education teams are currently using AI to unlock productivity and efficiency gains for their education teams. And the number one question is, how are they doing that, right? What are people actually doing? And so today we've got a great group of speakers who are talking about how people are actually doing that to give you some ideas and inspiration of what you can do in your practice. So in terms of this webinar, the chat is open, so if you want to introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, we'd love to hear from you. In the bottom of your screen, if you would like to turn on closed captions, you can. And then we're going to have some time for Q&A later. So if you have questions that come up, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then finally, this session is recorded. So if you have to jump off at some point because you've got another meeting or something going on, we are recording this webinar. We will make sure that it gets to you. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to my friend Melody Moore. So Melody works at Accenture, and she has been kind of leading the charge on rolling out some AI functionality to her team. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen while we're here too. Yeah, and she's going to share with us some stories and then also some things that she's learned in the process. So I'll let you take it from here, Melody.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Melody Moore. I work for Accenture in a group called Intelligent Citizen Services, and we handle all of the public sector clients for Accenture in North America. And I work specifically in the learning and development sector, rolling out learning management systems for each of our public sector clients, designing a strategy for implementation of systems, and putting together technology solutions for learning and development. A lot of our public sector clients have call centers, and so a lot of what we do is aligned with onboarding, new hire, and we do some upskilling as well. I'm going to start today with a story. A couple of nights ago, I was watching television and I saw a commercial, and the commercial was something I hadn't seen before. I did some internet research, and it's a commercial for an investment company, but it didn't tell me that it was an investment company until the very end. So I want to tell you about this commercial. You may have seen it. It's been out for about a month. At the beginning of the commercial, a man walks out of an office building and walks across the plaza and gets into a car. And he says, "Car, take me home." And the car says, "Sure, James." And then the car begins to drive. And you can see James settle into the back seat. He pops open his phone. He's checking his email or doing whatever it is that he does at the end of the day. And he says, "Car, could you turn down the music a little?" And the car says, "Of course, James." And then the scene broadens and you see it's dark outside and there's a beautiful cityscape in the background, and the car is traveling over a bridge. James looks up for a moment and notices that the car has taken a turn off of the main road onto a side road. And he says, "Car, this isn't the way home." And the car says, "You're right, James, it isn't." And James says, "Where are we going, car?" And about that time, the car travels through a very dark, foresty, foggy environment and pulls up in front of an old stone building. But it's very dark, it's unlit, and you can't see what's going on at the building, and you can't see where they've arrived, but James decides to get out of the car anyway. And this is the point where my horror story brain goes, no, don't get out of the car. Wait, maybe definitely get out of the car because the car took you somewhere you didn't want to go, which is scarier. I don't know. But James is game. He gets out of the car and he walks over to the stone building, and all of a sudden, people come at him from all sides and the lights flick on, and there are balloons and streamers and sparklers and party lights and a woman with a cake, and everyone yells, "Surprise!" And James has arrived at his surprise party. James looks back at the car and he says, "Car, did you have anything to do with this?" And the car says, "Nothing gets by you, James." And then the tagline comes up and it says, "The future isn't scary, but not investing in it is." As you can imagine, I was very taken by that commercial because so many of our technology advances that have come out recently seem to have some sort of element of horror story attached to them. We've all seen movies where the car does trap you and takes you somewhere or puts you in an accident. As I researched this commercial, I found that there are two other commercials in this series called "The Future Isn't Scary." And in one of them, the young girl is in a smart home and she's telling the smart home to turn on the lights and adjust the thermostat and all of the things that your smart home does. And then she says, "Unlock the front door so she can leave." And the smart home device says, "I can't do that." And she says, "Why not?" "Because you've forgotten your protein shake." And the girl says to the smart home device, "You sure are dramatic these days." But I think we all have some fear and trepidation about how smart devices are taking over and how technology is leading us into situations that are really kind of beyond our control. So today, as I talk about the strategy that we used to implement the AI features that Intellum has provided in our learning management system, I want to let you know that one of our main goals was to ensure that it was not scary for our users, for our developers, or for our clients. So many of our clients in the public sector are state government or government entities, and they're very reluctant to move forward without really thorough testing. So I was really happy to be able to provide an opportunity to demonstrate and roll this out in a way that makes it very accessible. So let's get into the slides, shall we? All right, so I mentioned our strategy that we wanted something basic. We wanted to use a simple strategy that would be easy to implement. In part, that's because I knew that our developers were going to need to take this back and share the technology with their client. And so it needed to be something that when I demonstrated the technology for them and we talked about it, that they could also duplicate. I wanted it to be very accessible to our team members. I wanted them to not feel like this was something that was out of their control, and certainly something that wouldn't take a lot of extra learning. And fortunately, Intellum has really done a lot of the heavy lifting there, putting into place a system that we can access without being programmers or coders, and without having to learn to design complicated prompts to talk through the AI technology. The next thing I knew that we wanted was we wanted to have clear and attainable goals. we wanted to set some parameters right up front for the things that we were looking for. One of the things that we wanted to be sure that we knew was whether this would result in an efficiency, productivity boost, or some sort of cost savings. Everybody in today's world is looking for cost savings. And so we wanted to be able to quantify those elements and be able to actually relate that back to management and say, here is what we can gain from using this system. And finally, we needed a lot of flexibility in our rollout. As I mentioned, I have all of the public sector accounts in North America for Accenture, and some of those accounts are very large with a lot of users, and some of them are very small. We have one account that has 8 new hires a year. And so they don't do a lot of technology, but we share our services with them because we have other contracts with that state. And where that puts us is in a position where each customer, each client has different needs, and we have to walk in with a solution that is flexible enough that we can apply it based on the needs of our client, based on the needs of our developer, based on the parameters of our contract. So those were the 4 things that we looked at when we started discussing what type of strategy we would need to use to move forward. So let's go ahead and talk about the methodology that we used. And again, this is a very simple methodology. I have 2 instances of the Intellum platform that I manage. One of those instances is dedicated specifically to one of our public sector customers, and the other one is a shared service between roughly 13 or 14 different public sector accounts. And what we did is we held training sessions, and we started with our initial training team, but then I invited all of our developers from all of our accounts to a training session. And during that training session, I had mocked up a few really basic pages that were not client specific and didn't contain any confidential information or proprietary information, but that were also really easy for people to use and look at and see. If you look at this Betty Crocker chocolate chip cookies, that is one of the actual pages that I used to demo with. And one of the things that I loved about it was that it had 3 very distinct sections. And so when we were using the AI to create learning objectives, you could actually see the objectives that had been created and how they related to each of the 3 segments of the page. Now, we did mock up a couple of different pages to use. So one was cookies, one was one that had to do with general benefits for Accenture employees. And then depending on the demo and the audience, then I would use existing curriculum as well to test. But we ran probably 6 different demo sessions to introduce the technology. And we did it in small groups of 5 or 6 developers at a time. And this allowed us to offer plenty of time for questions and to demonstrate fully. I walked them through, here's how to use Intellum's AI to create learning objectives. And then we went to the assessments and we built assessments. We also talked through some best practices that we use at Accenture and how that would work. And then finally, we talked about what we were asking of them as far as what we wanted to see them do with this information. Because it's great to say, hey, now this is available to you, but without a specific ask, there's a lot of people who won't try it. So we launched originally only in the staging environment so that our users weren't concerned about messing up anything in the live environment, taking away as much of that fear as possible. And I asked them each to go try it on their existing content and come back to me with their feedback. And I gave them some specific feedback. Now, in some instances, that feedback was very specific. We had one client that was launching all new content at the time. And so I gave them a lot more direction and asked them to actually do some timing and to keep some statistics to see how that worked for them versus the old method of manually putting together assessments and learning objectives. And for everybody else, I gave them some more general direction, asked them to test, asked them to give us feedback that I could bring back to Intellum. And that included things like, how would you like to see this work for the content that you're designing? What challenges did you encounter? Did you run into any real problems that need to be fixed? And then I was able to collect all of that feedback. And I did have several conversations with Intellum and talked through our discoveries. So next, I'd like to talk about the results, which I'm sure is what everybody really wants to hear about, right? Results. Shannon, if you'll go ahead and move us forward. I want to talk about the quantity of assessments that were created. In 2023, we created 238 assessments on our shared site. I did not put the numbers in for our dedicated site, but they did approximately 60 assessments in that same time frame. And then in 2024, so far this year, we have created 136 assessments. So we're not quite to the halfway point of the year, but if you double that, then we're going to look at 272 assessments total for this year. The dedicated site for our other account did 70 assessments in this same time frame. So we're looking to be on track to be over 100 there. And I tell you these numbers so that you can follow with me when we talk through our time savings and our efficiency factor. So this was our base when we started projecting what kind of savings we'll end up with and what kind of efficiency we can create going forward. Like, this is our average year over year. This is what we create. But obviously, we didn't have AI on January 1st. So I'm not telling you that we created 272 assessments for the year in AI. I'm telling you that this is the number that we're projecting and that we're basing our cost savings off for future years. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is the rubric that we ended up using. If you look at the top row, we timed how long it takes a developer to create an assessment. And so that upper left-hand dark purple that says 1 hour, we base that on a developer who is creating 30 questions. And we gave them 2 minutes per question to create their question, type it out, and come up with multiple choice answers that relate to that. Now, I will tell you that some of my developers are total rock stars and they can do 30 questions in 30 minutes. But I also have some designers and developers who prefer to take a more deliberate approach when they create an assessment, and it takes them a little longer than an hour to create 30 questions. So for the purposes of this presentation, I've used 1 hour. It's a nice round number. It works really well. And then in the upper right-hand side, in the lavender box that says 30 minutes, then we talked about the process that a developer takes in the LMS, or really in any system. We have some of our developers who are just transitioning to the LMS, and so they are accustomed to setting up their assessments in another program. And depending on the client, that program varies. But, everything from Microsoft Forms to SurveyMonkey to proprietary systems. But in all of those, the developer has to go in and create the assessment and then copy and paste the questions and the answers into the system, and then set all of the assessment properties, things like what's a passing score, how many times will a user be able to complete the assessment if they don't pass the first time, all of those properties that I'm sure you're already familiar with. And what we found is that, again, I've got a couple of rock stars that can copy and paste like nothing, and they can do 30 questions in 15 minutes. It takes me about 20. But then by the time that I've set the assessment properties and everything, we're closer to that 30-minute mark. And for our users that aren't as familiar with the system, it does take them a full 30 minutes to do that copy and paste and double check the properties. So we're looking at 1 hour and 30 minutes as the total time for manual assessment creation. And then we looked at what it took to create the same content using the AI feature at Intellum. And so we walked through all of the same steps using the AI. The developer has to create the assessment first before the AI can scan the content, but then the AI generates questions and answers. And we all know that it's set right now to create 10 questions from your content. But we set this up so that it was looking at multiple modules. So it would go in and it would create the 10 questions for the first module. And then we would set another section in our assessment and give it a new module and ask it to create 10 questions for that. And then a third section for the third module. And that is going to be our process for our developers going forward, is to create assessments in sections when they have modules that require more than 10 questions. And so in order to generate the 3 sections at 10 questions each to get to our 30 questions, it took 6 minutes. That's what we came up with. That was very common across the board. Everybody who answered was right in that 6 minute, 7 minute range. And then, of course, our developers needed to go in and validate the questions, just eyeball them, make sure that the question aligned with the learning objectives, make sure the answers made sense. And then you still need to set your assessment properties for passing grade and a number of retakes, etc. But we found that that process then was slightly under our 30-minute mark. And what we decided was that our AI creation saved us a full hour, that we still needed to take the time to validate the questions, set the properties, run the AI, but that it matched up roughly with the 30 minutes that we used for a developer to create that. And so the time that we were eliminating was the time that it took for a developer to write out all the questions, type out all the questions, and answers, actually come up with the questions and answers. And that gave us a 1 hour efficiency savings for every assessment that we use AI on. Let's move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there we are with a 1 hour time savings per assessment. And we rough estimated at 270 assessments per calendar year. And bear in mind that that did not include our dedicated site. So it's, a full 100 more than that. But I am working under the assumption that it won't be appropriate to use AI for every assessment. And that's fair. So, we're looking at a lesser number than what we anticipate to be an actual number, to account for that flexibility and to account for kind of what we don't know yet. And where that leaves us is not just with an efficiency, but with a cost savings of 270 hours of developer time savings. And that is time that your developers can spend doing other things, which is something they're also excited about. That I think we're all working under that same constraint these days. There's never enough time. So having 270 hours of developer time savings actually translates into a rather large cost savings annually that we were able to present to management as, using the AI for only assessments will save us quite a bit of money. And I think everybody's really happy with that. So let's talk about now um, how the rubric went. And Shannon, if you'll move us to the next bit. Yes. All right. So as I said, I asked all of our developers to give me some hard facts, particularly on an account that was creating all new material from scratch. And what we came up with is that when a developer went through the validation process and eyeballed each of those AI generated questions and answers, that they were able to accept fully 70% of the questions and answers without any changes or edits. We also found that 10% of the questions were acceptable with minor edits. And that might be something as simple as changing one of the multiple choice answers or using preferred verbiage that our client prefers, particularly since we work in that public sector space. A lot of times there's preferred verbiage that a customer requires. And so it might require us to change one or two words where the AI hasn't learned the preferred verbiage yet. But that meant that we were able to accept 80% of the AI generated questions with no real hard lift. And I think that was really reassuring to everybody on the team, even people who had not tested it. Once we released this metric, they were all like, oh, it really does work. And yeah, it really does. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 20% here in a minute. But Shannon, if you'll move us forward. So what we found was that there were some unexpected opportunities for improvement. We knew that using AI to generate our assessments and to generate our learning objectives was already an opportunity for improvement in our training materials and for our learning and development teams. But we also found that those 20% of questions that we weren't able to accept as is or with minor changes were a different type of opportunity. This was an opportunity for us to go back to our training materials and look at why the AI chose these questions and this content. Was it because we had highlighted it in some way that we didn't intend? Was there some kind of verbiage that needed to be changed? Did we not emphasize it enough? What could we do to make this learning more clear to our end users? Because ultimately it is about the learners. And if AI couldn't figure out these questions and couldn't put together a question and answers about it, then probably our learners weren't picking up what we were trying to teach. And so this became an opportunity for our developers and designers to go in and look at how the material was presented, what content was there, and to make changes to our learning materials. And that was something that we didn't really anticipate. We were very focused on like, what's the time savings going to be? What's our efficiency? But in the end, what we found was that it also gives us the opportunity to put together better materials and to do a better job for our learners. So that has been a surprise for us. Maybe not as unexpected for some people, but as I said, we were very focused on those metrics and pulling those together. So it was nice to have kind of bonus opportunities to come out of this. All right, Shannon.
Awesome. I'm going to go to our last slide here just for Q&A. I am also going to post a link in the chat. So I mentioned earlier, this is talk 3 of 4. We have one more coming up with Intellum's VP of Product and Senior Product Marketing Manager talking about a learning revolution. How can we use AI for education? So if you have already registered, you'll see the Zoom link on your calendar or in your email. If you haven't yet registered, you can use the link in the chat. Now we're going to transition to a time of Q&A with Melody. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those. Also, as people just want to plug that at the end of the webinar, you'll see a survey. So please take a moment to fill out the survey. It helps us produce content that you wanna listen to. All right, so Melody, the first question Amy asked was, what AI tool are you using to create assessments?
So we're using the Intellum tool that's integrated into the LMS platform.
Awesome. Yeah, so there are AI labs within Intellum that you can, there's some different AI features like around automated learning objectives, AI generated assessments and learning objectives and things like that. So we're talking specifically about those AI generated assessments.
Yeah, we
Mark,
found that was very, I'm sorry. I found that it was very easy for our team to pick up on. Accenture has a very large focus on AI, but a lot of our learning and development teams had never had the opportunity to do this. So it was a great entry level step for them to be able to work without having to figure out how to write a prompt or how to use a separate program outside of the LMS.
Kind of building on that. So Mark had asked, how are the AI learning libraries defined and selected? Is this as simple as the existing courseware that requires an assessment, or is it something else?
Very much the existing courseware. We did design a few courses specifically to test the AI. But for the most part, what we needed was to see how it works against the type of content that we currently produce.
All these questions kind of segment into the next one because Jeff had asked, can you describe the nature of the content? So for your clients that you're creating AI generated assessments for, is their content technical, more general? How would you describe the content itself?
There's a variety, again, with so many different clients that we're using that, there are some differences, but all of our clients send their customers to Accenture onboarding first. And so a lot of the content in the Accenture onboarding is how to access your Accenture details and whatnot. But then it also does a lot of soft skills, how to diffuse conflict, how to, good people skills type of training. But then after a learner finishes the onboarding with Accenture, then they are directed to process training for the client that they're going to work with. And that process training is often technical in nature. They have to learn to use the systems that the client is using. And so there is some technology that's included, but a lot of it is process based as far as, what is appropriate in the process. If you answer the phone and a customer has this question, what are your options? And so it's real, it's very mixed between process and technology training. So we do have both.
Awesome. And Vijay Kumar had a question around how much does the LLM model matter in such situations? Will it now be a matter of which model you're using versus whether you're using AI or not?
Again, it's going to really depend from one client to the next. And I think that's one of the things that we really appreciated about this foray into AI by Intellum was that it was something that we could use in a flexible manner. And so there's no real like one size fits all answer for what I do, unfortunately. But that is part of what I do is, solutions for a variety of clients. And so it depends. It's not a great answer, but that's the answer.
I feel like it depends is the answer more often than not. And if people are trying to pigeonhole us into one way, that's probably not the answer. It's
Right.
an answer.
Yes.
Um, all right. Charlie had a question. Curious if you've tried having AI take the assessment itself based only on the course content and then citing the course for its answers as a way of determining if the content covers the objectives.
We have not done that. That is probably like phase two, which will probably hit at the end of the summer. We have a lot of seasonal come and go with our clients. That's not really a good way to put it. But as each project ramps up and as initiatives at those projects ramp up and ramp down, we tend to have some time where we can focus. And so we were able to give a good deal of time to the AI initiatives in March, but it will probably be August before we can pull phase two. The other challenge for us is using that content outside of the LMS means that we have to run the gauntlet of getting permission from our clients to run their content on a site that maybe hasn't been previously approved. So we'd like to do that. Certainly that is on our list for the next run. Good instinct, but not yet. We have not done that.
I love that as a use case to kind of check.
Mhm.
And then also your approach to just iterating, right? I think that's a word
Yes.
we've heard a lot today is to try something, we're iterating, we're training the AI, giving it some feedback, but then also kind of implementing in series and segments, right? So we can start adopting AI for one thing like assessments and then move to something like learning objectives or content creation later. Um, I think Archie had a clarifying question around, so on the slide, I'm actually going to go back on the screen here. Um, Here on the slide where it talks about the assessment creation,
Mhm.
he said it looks like part of the AI creation, right, is that a developer is validating the AI generated questions. And I think he's wondering in the human process, do you also have someone kind of validate the questions that a developer has created?
We do. We do have a peer review process. Again, that varies from one client to the next. Sometimes it's validated by our client. Sometimes it's validated by another member of the training team or another developer. So there's some variation there. But yes, and we did not factor that in because there are so many variations that we couldn't get a strong metric for like what that actually entails. Because it is different everywhere.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things I like about how you broke this down too is you're finding kind of the average, right? There's no perfect number where 100% of the time it takes this much time to create the assessment, this much time to QA, this much time to do this. It's going to vary by person, but then we're kind of looking at the average savings across the entire team, which helps us to maybe just put a figure on it, right? I mean, you can tell, I'll go back ahead here to, about 270 hours, right? Give or take, depending on how many assessments. And then are these people who kind of create them more quickly, more slowly, but we're kind of averaging out 270 just for assessments is a significant time savings.
Mhm.
Awesome. Any other final questions before we wrap up here with Melody? All right, cool. Well, thank you all for jumping in, attending today's session. Thank you, Melody, for sharing your experience. I think it was a great introduction to how someone is actually rolling this out to their team, right? Because a lot of questions we hear is around, okay, how do I actually roll this out to my team? Give people a chance to try things out, get their feedback on it. So I appreciate that you were kind of learning through the process and helping people navigate how to adopt different AI tools for their work. And then again, the recording will go out for this. If you're available at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, we'd love to see you on our next and final webinar in this series on practical use cases of AI. And thank you again, Melody, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
All right, bye for now, everybody.